Begin the current Daf Mesechta Yevamos Daf Ayin Ches. We begin the 6th line of Daf at the top of the Amud, where the Gemara continues the discussion of the previous Daf. We were discussing here in Perek Ha'oral a lot of the Pesulei HaKahal, those that are prohibited to get married to the Jewish people. This relates to the topic about who gets to feed Truma, or if they make the women actually puzzle because of their biyam. Today's Daf. One thing we're going to discuss in today's Daf, as we mentioned, the Ger Mitzri, and specifically explaining and taking apart and unpacking the pasuk Banim Asher Yivoldu Lahem, the sons that are going to be born to them, Dor Shlishi, third generation, Yevalem Mikal Hashem, which simply understands that, the Egyptian converts, only third generation can marry to the Jewish people, but we're going to learn out many different things from that pasuk. Ubi Archimahu, the concept about, do we say the fetus is like the thigh of the mother? Do we say that the fetus is an extension of the mother? This Gairu, if the non-Jews convert, so the couple, Halachar Chapagim Shabishneim, if each one has a certain deficiency, we go after the deficiency of each one of them. And Mamzeim and the Sinim, Mamzeim is an illegitimate child from a forbidden union, and the Sinim are the Gevainim that they fooled the Jewish people and they convert, although they were supposed to be wiped out from the 7 nations. They're never allowed to marry into the cow. So we begin the current Daf Ayin Ches, 6 lines down at the top of the Amud, where we continue the discussion.
Can the deficiency be cured somehow?
Could be, yeah, when you marry a shivcha. We'll see that on is possible. I'm trying to remember that's today's Daf. When you marry a shivcha, and then it goes after her, and then when they are freed as a slave, so then that takes care of deficiencies because it's considered her child.
That union is allowed to marry a shivcha?
Yeah. As ever.
Because the shivcha belongs to Alter Udin, and is he allowed to having a relationship with it?
An Ebed, right, it's an Ebed.
But he's not Ebed, we're talking about the Muslim.
Who? Anyone. I'm saying anyone could go ahead and...
You're allowed to have it because in a way he's a girl, he's just not allowed to what we call. So he's a girl allowed to have problems with the shivcha.
As an Ebed Ivri, for sure, right? And
you could tell yourself.
You could tell yourself as an Ebed Ivri.
So the person has the din as an Ebed?
With
the Givoini.
No, they don't have to be. Every child goes after the shivcha. The shivcha
is allowed. Is the student allowed to have
a shivcha
with the shivcha?
Why not? Yeah.
He's a girl. Can a girl?
She's not considered part of the kahal of the shivcha.
So that's the reason why a shivcha cannot be with when it's through, because it's from the kahal and they are not from the kahal.
Could a person have?
Because he's a girl. Now he's not coming to the kahal, but he's a girl. He's a ben chodesh. But I understand. I'm just asking.
Right. A shivcha is what's the status of a shivcha? Oh, she's right. She's not Jewish. She has some halachas of a Jew. Right, but every is permitted in a shivcha. That's what's Parsha Mishpat.
But that's a special look at the Torah for it.
Right. So I'm saying he could sell himself as an Ebed and then he would be permitted in a shivcha. Right. So we begin the 6th line down at the top of the Amud Daf Ayin Ches. Talking about learning the Bryce, we continue the discussion of the Isser of Mitzvah Ademi that we mentioned in the Mishnah. We said Echad Zachar Be'echad Dekebus. So now we unpack this pasuk. In Nemar, if it says in the pasuk in Devar, Banim, the pasuk there reads Banim, like we said, Ashivoldim Dor Shlishi, the 3rd generation of the Egyptian converts. Yavalem Mikal Hashem, they can come into the Kal Hashem. So if it says Banim, so Labanim Adairis, if you look at the pasuk, it says sons and it says generations. Essentially, that's the same thing. Your 3rd generation sons. You're saying sons and you're saying generations. Meaning, it says Banim Ashivoldu Lahem Dor Shlishi Yavalem Mikal Hashem. You could just say Banim Ashivoldu Lahem Shlishi, or you could say Dairis. So the Gemara, the Brisa asks in both ways. If it says Banim, why say Dairis? If Banim Dairis, Banim Banim, why say Banim? As Rashi says, just write either Ben Shlishi Yavai or Dor Shlishi Yavai. You don't have to write Banim and Dairis. So it says the Brisa like this. No, you need both. If it would say sons, 3rd sons, and not generations, I would say that a ger who converts, a ger mitzri that has 3 sons, after he converts, that ben rishon risheni as, so the 1st and 2nd sons are forbidden, but shlishi mutter that the 3rd son is permitted. And if it would say ben shlishi, if it says generations, to tell us that no, all his sons are forbidden and only his grandsons are permitted. I would say der shlishi and it wouldn't say sons. I would have said, for those Jews that were there by Har Sinai, that's where it says that your 3rd generation could come into Kahal. In other words, in you and in your sons, that's where Mitzri Nadim is forbidden. But by your grandsons, it's going to be permitted for a Mitzri, even a Gerishan, to marry. So the Kachnim Ban, therefore it had to say Ban Mashi Yivoldu Lahem, to tell you that no, that even their sons that they're gonna have, I mean the extra word is essentially telling you another halacha. Tell me not only third generation from Matan Torah, that for all time the halacha is going to be that their sons are going to be forbidden. You're never going to have a first generation Nitzri. You're going to have always a third generation Nitzri. That's the only one that's permitted to come in. Now the word lahem, it says ban meshivod lahem, teaches mehem mana, meaning the Mitzri himself is the first generation, his son is the second generation, and his grandson is already permitted in the Kehillah. That's what lahem. For them, they're the first generation. Now, lahem, it says 2 times in the pasuk lahem. It says ban meshivod lahem, and it says der shlishi yod lahem. So the second lahem is teaching us halach achar pesulam. You go after their invalidations. In other words, it sounds like you go after them. That if, let's say, they get intermarried with kosher ones, for example, a mitzvah that marries the Yisraelis, a regular Jewish woman, or if a Jewish man marries a mitzvah, you're going to go after the psul, and the child is going to be puzzled up until the 3rd generation. That's what Lahem says, you go after them. Now,
why should the child suffer? Because if the parent did something wrong, why should he suffer? Why does the mom suffer?
he wants to know why the moms are suffering.
I see. Right.
Now you have to write lahem, which sounds like that you count from them. As we said, there's 2 drashas of lahem. You count from from them, and you have to write that are going to be born to them. In other words, that you shouldn't say that ashivoldu means that you count from their sons, and then you would have a contradiction on the psukim. Rather, the Gemara is coming to explain that it's coming to teach you something else by Ashivoldu, meaning Lahem and Ashivoldu seem to be contradictory. Lahem, as you tell me, it means you count from them, they're the first generation. Ashivoldu sounds like that which you're counting of only the children that are born. So in that sense, the Brisa no. Because of Rahman Ashivoldu had it written Ashivoldu, then I would have thought the same. If name on it, the 3 generations you start counting only from the children, not from the ger himself. Because Rahman Lahem, like we darshan, Lahem means you start counting from them. Now, because Rahman Lahem had we written Lahem, I would have thought to say mitzvahs mu'beresh and isgaira. An Egyptian woman that's pregnant is converting. In her 6-month pregnancy, she's converting. Hiu b'nachad, I would have thought to say she and her son are 1 generation. That's what Lahem would tell me. You start from her. Because Rahman, that's what Teretz Ashivoldu that is born to tell you that any birth after the Geiris, we're going to consider as another generation. And that is what you're learning from Ashivoldu. Now, that's one lahem. Then the other lahem we also is saying the itzrich. Itzrich lemechtav lahem hacha. Over here, lahem tells us, like we said, there were 2 lahem. The other one tells you halach achar pisulan, that you go after the invalid element, even though the other parent is kosher. Now, the itzrich lemechtav loy gabi mamzer, where also by mamzer, the also says the word loy to teach you that you go after pisuloi, meaning if let's say a mamzer marries a kosher person, not a mamzeres, the child's going to be a mamzer because you go after that parent that's the flawed parent. Why do you have to say this halacha twice, one by mamzer and one by the halacha of mitzri? Says the Torah, because had we only written the halacha over here by the mitzri, I would tell you that. That's why you go after the flawed parent, mishum the bamig tipa psula, because the Egyptian comes from a invalid droplet of seed because his father was not Jewish. Of the mamzer, the bamig tipa ksher, but a mamzer that actually his father was a regular Jew. Now, yeah, they obviously sinned and created a mamzer, but ultimately it comes from a kosher droplet. In Malay, I would say actually that there you don't go after the flawed parent. You wouldn't go after the mamzer, and you would say the child's kosher. Now, same thing is the reverse. Because mamzer, had we only said it by mamzer, I would say b'shem de'ein roll over b'kal oilam. Yeah, mamzer is very severe. If one of the parents is a mamzer or mamzeres, a mamzer is never allowed to marry the Jewish people forever. That's why I'm going to say that the child's going to go after the flawed parent. Maybe by the Egyptian name of I would say no, maybe you don't go after the invalid parent and you go after the kosher parent. So tzricha, you needed lahem and loy, both by mitzri and by mamzer, to tell you the halacha, you go after the flawed parent. Now, related discussion, he says mitzri sheni shenasa mitzvahs rishayna. If a 2nd generation Egyptian convert married a 1st generation Egyptian woman convert. So says Rabbi Yechanan, B'no shlishi hava. Her son is going to be a third generation. Which Teisi Shem says, we said, halach achar psuleihem. So then you would seem to be that it should be the worst of the two parents, it should be second generation. Says the Teisi Shem, that's only by an Amoini and a Mitzri that married a Bas Yisrael, or the other way around. If one of the parents was Jewish and one was not. But by one nation of, let's say, Egyptians, that we weren't talking about at all, and that Rabbi Yehuda could hold that the child would be a third generation. But Al Muksabah, one thing we see, at least, is that he holds Basa Didei Shadin Lei, that we go after the father, because the father is the second generation, the mother was the first generation, and we see that the child is going to be a third generation. The Master Rabbi Yisrael asks him a Mishnah Mesechus Kedushin. The Mishnah says with the Reb Tarfon Noam, he says, "Yichoylin mamzerim litar." This was a question that was posed before we started the shiur. Is there any way to fix the child that's flawed? How could you purify a mamzer? Ketzad. So it says Reb Tarfon, mamzer nasa shivcha. What we do is we have to take this illegitimate child. He marries a shivcha. Havrat evet, the child's going to be a slave. Shichrei, once the slave is freed, nimtze b'chayrin, comes out he's a free person. Okay, that's the Mishnah. But Amma, one thing says, Rabbi Yosef, you see from the Mishnah, Basa di dasha din law, how could Rabbi Yechon say you go after the father, and therefore the child's going to be a third generation? We see from the Mishnah Mesechus Kedushin that you go after the mother, because the father is a mamzer. Was it helped by him marrying a shifcha, that now it's an evet to be free, to be regular Yisrael, but says he's a mamzer because the father. Says Gemara Shani Hasan, there it's different by shivcha, because that's exactly that the child will be a shivcha like the shivcha. Because the Amakra, there's a special pasuk in the Torah and Parsha Mishpatim. Ha'isha v'ladeo tiladina. The woman and her children will be to her master. So that's a special example that the children take on the status of the mother, and therefore that's a way of purifying a mamzer by marrying a shivcha. But it doesn't refute Rabbi Yechon's premise that in general we go after the father and not after the mother.
Father's not around.
What?
Father's not around, takes away.
Yeah, that doesn't affect the paternity. The genetic code is still the same. The DNA. So the Gemara has another question on Rabbi Yechon. Masa Brava, and we quoted this teaching before on Daf Ayin Vav and Beis, that Amar Rabbi Yehuda, he says Minyamin was his name, was a Ger Mitzri, he's an Egyptian convert. He was my friend. We Talmid Rabbi Kiva from the students Rabbi Kiva, which Aaron wants to know from the first Talmid Rabbi Kiva, the second group of Talmid Rabbi Kiva. But Al Kapal is from the students Rabbi Kiva. But he says Ani Mitzri. He says that I'm a first generation convert. I married an Egyptian woman, first generation. I'm going to marry to my son a second generation female convert. I can see my Einiglich marrying into the I want to see them marrying into the Gil. Okay. Now it says the Gemara, now if you would think to say, then we go after the paternity of the father. Why does he have to marry to his son, a second generation female convert? What do you mean? You can marry a first generation to his son because you don't go after the mother, you go after the father according to Rabbi Yechonon. You see now Rabbi Yechonon, we see you don't necessarily go after the father. So actually says the Gemara, Rabbi Yechonon actually told to the one who taught the Brisa, Tanei Rishayna. They actually no, don't say that he said I'm going to marry off to my son, a second generation. Say first generation because you're according to Rabbi Yechonon. It doesn't depend on the mother, it depends on the father. Now that's one version of Rabbi Yechonon. However, it says the Gemara Kiyasad of Dimi Rabbi Yechonon, before we had the teaching was Rabbi Babachan and Rabbi Yechonon. Now it's Kiyasad of Dimi. When Rabbi Dimi came on Rabbi Yechonon, he said a different version of Rabbi Yechonon. He said the opposite. He said mitzvah sheni shenosa mitzvah rishayna. If it's the same case, a second generation male Egyptian convert that marries a first generation Egyptian woman convert, b'nash sheniha. The son is a second generation mitzri. So we see according to his version of Yechon, it was the opposite. We make it go based on the mother, and therefore it's going to be a second generation. Now, the assumption of the Gemara right now is that why would we say you go after the mother? Is because of a halachic concept known as uber yerech imahu, which means to say that the fetus we consider as part of the mother, and therefore, since the mother is the one who gives birth to the child, we're going to say that the child is going to have the status of the mother. That's how the Gemara assumes right now.
Maybe it's because she's a mother and the father is not a mother.
I hear. I mean, that's why we would say he goes after her, right? Yeah, and it's interesting to see why the Gemara makes an assumption that why should the status be based on maternity because of Ube Yerech Imahu? What does it have to do with the mother person? But maybe it's related to that concept because we know he's part of her. So on this halacha, the Gemara asks Amalei Abaya. Abaya says to Reb Dimi, he says, Elahadam Rabbi Yechanan, if this is what you're saying, Rabbi Yechanan holds that we go based on the mother because the child is considered a part of the mother. But what do you do with the following teaching of Rabbi Yechanan? Because again, this is Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan said, Hifrish chatas mu'uberes. A different halachic concept, but it relates in. So it's not really from the content of our Masechta. Hifrish chatas mu'uberes. Let's say someone has an obligation to bring a korban chatas. He ate chaylev. He ate forbidden fats. He ate something not kosher. He didn't realize. He went out to eat. It was not kosher. He has to bring a korban chatas. Now, what happens if he separates a chatas mu'uberes? The korban chatas, that female animal that he brings as a sin offering, was pregnant, v'yolda, and that korban chatas now gave birth to another animal. So says Rabbi Yechanan, if he wants to, he can have the atonement with the mother, and the child will then go out to graze till it develops a blemish. Or if he wants, he can get the atonement with the child, and then the mother animal will go out and graze and develop a blemish. Says Rabbi like this. Here's Rabbi Yechanan teaching. If you say that the fetus is not considered as the thigh of the mother, so it makes sense that if the person wants to, he could get atonement with the child. Why? Because that essentially means to say, when he was doing the separation of this animal as a korban chatas, the fetus was really considered an independent korban chatas, because it's not yerech imay. The embryo is considered independent from the mother, because it's not yerech imay. Yerech imay means it's part of the mother. It's like one of the limbs and the organ of the mother. It's not. When you say lav yerech imay, it's independent. Just like the halacha, when you separate two sin offerings for insurance purposes, where you're concerned, you're a very conservative person, you're very worried and nervous if one of them gets lost, so you'll atone it with the other one. So, Rashi says, we say vlad chatas is lemisa. That's where you separate an animal that was not pregnant and then became pregnant and gave birth. That's considered vlad chatas. But when the animal was already pregnant, when you made it a hafrasha with the korban chatas, that's considered like two independent animals. And then whichever one you get to tongue with, the other one will go out and graze. Fine, that makes sense. Because says if you separate two sin offerings for insurance purposes, you could atone whichever one you want to. And the second one will go out to graze. Rashi says, the Gemara says in Tumur Daf Tezayin and Aleph, that a chatas that the owner gets atonement with, then it gets atonement with something else, then it has to go out to be lemisa, not to graze and double lamsh and then use. That says Rashi, that's for example where if he separates a chatas and it gets lost, and then he separates another one to take its place, and then you find the first one, that's called chatas shechib braleh, that has to go and has to be killed. But when you separate initially two of them, that's not considered chatas shechib braleh, and it's not considered vlad chatas, so therefore the halacha would be the other one would go out to graze. That I understand if you'll love it, yerachim. But if you say ubi yerachim that the fetus is considered the thigh of the mother, havale vlad chatas. That means to say it was part of the mother. It wasn't independent. If it's part of the mother, then it's considered a derivative of a chatas. It's not considered its own chatas to do a mafresh. You didn't separate this as a chatas. It's part of the mother. And then now it's an outgrowth of the mother. It's a vlad chatas. So vlad chatas lemisazal. Vlad chatas goes to misa. How could you tell me that you could get atonement with the child? You're telling me, Rabbi Dimi, that Rabbi Yechanan holds ubeyerech imai, as we see that you go based on the mother, because as the Gemara is presuming that's based on the principle of ubeyerech imai. Rabbi Yechanan himself says ubelav yerech imai. Because we held ubeyerech imai, and how would you be allowed to go ahead and take the child and get an atonement with it? That's vlad chatas. That should be lemisa asla. So ishtik Rabbi Dimi was saying. So Abaye said to him, Dil mashani hasa. Maybe it's not difficult because maybe over there, by the child of the mitzvah and the mitzvah is different, and it's not dependent on the principle of ubi yerachim. Because the chsivit says in the pasuk ashi yivoldu. What does it mean ashi yivoldu? Hakasav toloi b'leida. the pasuk makes dependent on birth, which, as Rashi explains, who gives birth is the mother. And maybe Uber is lav yerchimayu. And maybe that's why Rabbi Yochanan holds that when you have this pregnant chatas, you get a Talmud Shem when you want to because Uber lav yerchim, it's considered independent carbon. So what are you going to do with the halacha of the mitzri rishayna shenasa mitzvah shniya, that you're going to go based, or the other way, that mitzvah shayna married mitzvah rishayna, that the child's going to be a shniya because you go after the mother. That's because the pasuk tells you to go after the mother because that's Rashi Boldu. So Malay, so Dimi said to him, karkafna, which means like your head, meaning adam chashiv, chazise l'reishech ben amudei. Rashi says, well actually Rashi doesn't say, but the simple translation is, I saw your head between the pillars of where the learning was going on. But Taisa says it means your head means your Rabbi, Rabba, which was he was there for Rabbi Yochanan. But Kiyam Rabbi Yochanan, Lahoshmak Rabbi Yochanan said that teaching, that you were saying this over from what you heard, it wasn't your own teaching. In other words, this was something that he heard from Rabbi Yochanan himself, that he said this was specifically because it says over there, Ashiyaboldu, the kasser is totally belated. Now, parenthetical, this pasuk that we brought Ashiyaboldu says the Gemara time that says Ashiyaboldu. Sounds like that the reason is because it says Ashiyaboldu, by the mitzvah who marries and the child's going to be the third generation is dependent on the mother because she's the one who gives birth. It sounds like in general. But that we don't go after the mother. We go after the father. Like we said, because ubalav yerchimai. And we'll go after the paternity. It says the Gemara, Lahadam Rava, which says, why are you asking Rabbi Yochanan from Rava? We just want to stim it with Rava too. This the Rava says, Nachris mu'beresh in this guy room, if let's say you have a non-Jewish woman who she's converting when she's pregnant, but not in tzarech tvila. Her son does not need a tvila for the purposes of gerus, because the mother's tvila in the mikvah works for the fetus, for the embryo. Says the Gemara, Amay in tzarech tvila. What do you mean, why don't you need tvila? You're telling me that ubazlav yerchimai. So, if that's the case, the child should need to have his own tefillah. He says, according to biblical law, halach is rubayu makbid alav chaitzes. Only if the majority and one's particular about it is it considered a chatzitza. Ruba she'in makbid alav. If let's say it's covering a majority of the person's body, that he's not particular about it. In the it's not a chatzitza, and over here, like Rashi explains, the child's not particular about the chatzitza that blocks his body from touching the waters of the mikvah, because that's his normal growth to be inside the mother's womb. Now, the Gemara says over there that there were geyser on Rubai She'ena Makbid because of Rubai Shemakbid. That's rabbinic law. Here we keep it on the biblical law for the laws of tefillah. But it says the Gemara, even that won't work, as a continuum in base. Because V'amar of Kamni says, this halacha of, that if you're not makbid, even if it's covering the majority of the body, it's not going to be a chatzitza interposition, it's only the majority of a kulay. But if it's covering, if this chatzitza, if this imposition covering the whole body, chatzitza, even though you're not particular. And here the fetus is entirely covered by the mother, so how could the mother's tefillah work if you hold ubalav yerchimayu? If you hold yerchimay, just like the mother's body, whatever's internal organ doesn't need to go into the mikvah. It's part of a body. But here if you consider him as an independent being, so he's covered over with the mother, how's that going to work? So says the Gemara, Shani Uber, a fetus is different because I need a visa. That's his normal growth. In other words, it's not considered chatzitza. Anything that's considered the normal growth of an individual, of a person, that's considered as part of their essence. And here too, the fetus, that's how he grows, is in the womb. If you have to taival him because he's an independent being, in the mother's womb would also be considered his way of tefillah. Now, Kiyased Avino, or the Gear says, Rav and Omer B'Yechna. He says, our late halacha of what we're discussing here, what's the paternity of the child? Be'umais, by the nations of the world, meaning by the 7 nations, regarding the Isser of Lo Yisachaya Kol Neshama, of not to keep any person alive, Halach Achar Zachar. Then you go after the males, as we're going to explain later on. This Gairu, if they convert, then Halach Achar Pagum Shebeshneim. You go after the deficient of both of them, which, as we're going to explain, that's regarding Yichus. That's regarding their lineage as it applies to the Jewish people. As the Gemara explains. Be'umois, by the nations, Halach Achar Zachar, you go after the male. What does that mean? Kedetana Glenda Brisa. How do we know that one of the nations, not from the 7 nations of Canaan? Meaning what happened was when they came and they conquered Eretz Yisrael, there was a mitzvah of Leisichai Kol Neshama. All the 7 nations they had to wipe out. They couldn't leave any one of those nations of Canaan. All those that we say, Hachiti, Bamoida, Prizi, we say this in davening, none of them were able to stay alive. Now, let's say a different nation, some other nation from the Edom, comes Shabbat Cananis, Mitzri, has Bia with a Canaanite woman, and they have a son. From where do you know that you could purchase him as a slave? Meaning, you don't have to kill him because you go after the paternity of the father, and the father is not a Canaan, even though the mother is a Canaanist. How do you know this? You know it says the pasuk Yikra. It says also from those who were settlers that dwell with you, which what that sounds like is that they came from other nations and their fathers became settlers in your place. Mehem tiknu, from them you could buy, says the pasuk, as a slave. Now, you would think the other way also would work. You would think if one of the Canaanim, if the father's a Canaani, if he has a child, ben, from, let's say, some other nation, some other nationality, he has a child, you would think say Babylonian. You would think that you could go ahead and purchase that child as a slave. No, Talmud says the pasuk Asher Halidu ba'artzachem, that they gave birth in their land. What does it mean that they gave birth in their land? Min hanoylodim ba'artzachem, from those who give birth in their land, meaning that his mother is from your land, and that they gave birth over there. And not from those who live in their land, meaning they're born somewhere else because the mother is from another nation. That's artzachem, that's your land, and then afterwards they come to dwell by their father in your land. Because like Rashi points out, the norm is by a woman that she stays in her place, but the man wanders. So when it says haneilodim ba'aretz, giving birth in the land, that means the mother is from the Shiva Umais. But those that are born somewhere else, for sure the mother is from some other nation, and therefore it's logical when the pasuk is coming to exclude is where the father is a Canaani. So if the pasuk says those who are settlers with you, so mehem tiknu, because those are the ones that the father is from some other nationality, and now they came to live over here because they come to where the mother is. Oh, so those are okay, but when it says Asher Helidu,
why is that okay? Even though, because she lives in a different country.
No, because the main principle is if the father is a Canaani, that's what we're saying, that we go after the Zachar, but the mother, if she's from a Canaanist, that won't be a problem. So the Gemara is just trying to show us where we know this from, where it says Min hanelodim ba'artzachem, v'lo min hagodim ba'artzachem. Only those who are born in your land, but not from those who dwell in your land, because if they're dwelling in your land, that means to say that the father is from Canaan, because they were born somewhere else. So that's why it has to be born in somewhere. Asher lidu ba'artzachem. Asher lidu, that we say Asher lidu ba'artzachem, those that are born in your land, where his mother is, the mother, yeah, exactly. If they're born in your land, that means the mother is a Canaanist. So then, because they stay where the mother is, that's where we say then you could go ahead and purchase that as a slave. Because if it was the other way around, a garim ba'artzachem, then you wouldn't be able to, because that would mean that the father is a Canaan. Now we continue with the halacha. We said in this gairu, if they convert, halacha chapagim shebeshneim. You go after the deficient of either one. Says Gemara, what's the case told? So the Gemara explains. If you think it's about an Egyptian that married an Ammonite woman, and we're saying that you go after the father, meaning that even if, let's say, he gives birth to a girl, that she's going to be forbidden up until 3 generations. In other words, and we don't say you go after the mother to permit her right away, because if you go after the mother, we know Ammonite below Ammonite, they're permitted right away. Says the Gemara, my pogum shabashnein isba. What would you mean then when you're saying the deficient of either one of them? If it's not like they're both pogum, it's just one's more pogum than the other one. But it's not true because Amoinus is not pogum at all, because we say Amoini, it says in the pasuk, Amoinus. So that wouldn't be a good case of pogum shabashnein because you don't have both of them being pogum. And rather the case is Amoini Shanas Mitzvah. It's talking about where you have an Amoini that married an Egyptian woman where they're both pogum, because the mitzvahs is a first generation mitzvahs. So that's what's saying it depends what the more pogum is going to be. If they give birth to a boy, we're going to go based on the father who's not moini, and the child's going to be forbidden forever. In a case, if they give birth to a girl, we're going to go after the mother who's a mitzvah, and then she's going to be a second generation mitzvah, and she's going to be forbidden for Yisrael. And that is, we don't go after the father who's not moini, which would then permit his daughter right away, because that's no problem for Amoinis. So the case of Amoinis Shanas Mitzvahs, that's a case where, depending on the child, we're going to go after the chomer, the pogum of Shabashnein. Now we get to halacha, the next Mishnah, which the Mishnah continues with those who are psuli called, that are not permitted to marry into the Jewish people. So Mamzerim, we know, is an illegitimate child when the parents had a forbidden union, which Machlek is exactly which one, Misa, Koris, and V'nesinin, where they're from what's called the Gevainim. They're from the people who tricked you in the days of Yeshua to convert. They didn't realize that they really were from the 7 nations, and they made them as slaves to chop wood and to draw water. They're asur, and they're forbidden. V'isur in Israel, and their prohibition is forever. Where the male or female to marry to the Jewish people. Now, relating to back to halacha the Mishnah, Amr Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish says Mamzeres, a woman that's from an illegitimate union, after 10 generations, she's actually mutar, she's permitted. Where do we know this from? Because Yolav Asira Siri Ma'amoini Umay Avim. Meaning the Sifri brings that it says by the Amoinim, it says 10 generations. But we know that's forever. So too when it says Asiri by the Mamzer it doesn't say forever. By Mamzer it says Gam Doira Asiri Lo Yovel B'Kal Hashem. So though it says 10 generations, it means Ad Olam. Because I learned that by Amoini, which also says 10 generations, and that says Ad Olam. So here also, where it says 10 generations, also Ad Olam. But therefore, we learn as follows. It's a little bit of a cheshbon. Malam, just like over there, by Amoini, Amoini, in the caves, Mutaris, the women are permitted, because we said it's Amoini, V'lei Amoini, it's Ma'av, V'lei Ma'avis. Avkan also be here in the cave of Mutaris, the females of Mamzeres are permitted. So that says the Brisa, wait, it says Rish Lakish, wait a second. If just like over there, the women are permitted right away, Avkan Miyad, so to over here maybe the Mamzer should be permitted right away. No. Kiyahanik Zera Shava, what's the effectiveness of the Zera Shava of Ad Doira Asiri? Is Masir Ve'elav. Meaning, up until generations, by Mamzer itself, the Isser is explicit in the Parsha Mamzer itself. I don't need to learn out from Amoini Me'avi, and therefore I cannot learn out from Amoini that the females are permitted. Because Mamzer means Mumzar. Mumzar means a blemish, a foreign, which even would be for a woman. But from the 10th generation on, where the Isser is only learned out from Gzeir Shava of Amoini Me'avi, it doesn't say explicitly that a Mamzer is forever. We learn from Gzeir Shava from Amoini Me'avi, where there also says 10th generation, and there it says also forever. Oh, so therefore, the heter for the females is learned out from post 10 generations, where we're saying we can learn out from it and we're going to continue learning out from it. So therefore, that I would only know, like Amna Moyav, that the females are permitted, where I'm learning out the Isser from after 10 generations. That's what I'm going to say. But that Isser I'm learning out after 10 generations only for the men and not for the women. I says the Gemara, I would learn in our Mishnah, Mamzerim Sinisa Asurim, never been Misurim Nisailam, and the prohibition is forever, whether males or females. So you see that the females, the prohibition is forever, not like Rish Lakish. Says the Gemara, like Kash, not difficult. Why not? They're going like different Tanoic opinions. Rish Lakish was going Command Amar, like the one that says Don Mina, U Mina, which is a Machlekes Rabbi Lezer Yeshua in Chul Kaf Chafam at Beis, meaning Domina umina means to say that when you learn out something from Gzeir Shava, you learn out the whole context from over there. And but our Mishnah is command domina b'ukibas. But our Mishnah is going like the one that says that you learn out from it, but then you bring it back to the context where you're learning out too. Meaning, whatever you need to learn out, you learn out. Whatever you don't need to learn out, you learn out from the context of what the halach is by. So as Rashi explains over here, what Gzeir Shava is there by Mamzer? It doesn't say Ad Olam. Amonim Yabit says Aroin. So we learn from Mamzer, we learn Mamzer from Amin and Moyav, from Gzeir Shabbat, like we learned in the Debate Rav. It says over here Asiri, says over there Asiri, just like over there Asiri is forever, so to be Asiri is forever. Now, Resh Lakish holds like the one who says Dunmina Umina, meaning just like over there it says Ad Oilam, also it says Ad Oilam, that's what Dumina is, and Umina means continue to learn from there. Just like over there it's only males, not females, so over here by Mamzir, after 10 generations, is only Zacharim and not Nekevis. Which, again, we're only learning out post 10 generations because up until 10 generations, you don't need to learn out from Gzeir Shabbat. So there, females are going to be forbidden. But after that, Mamzeres will be permitted, says Rosh Hashanah. But the town of our Mishnah holds like the one who learned what's called Dumina Boki Ba'asara. What does that mean? Dumina means learn out, yes, just like over there, it's until forever. So the Mamzer also until forever. But then we say Boki Ba'asra, meaning, like we always have, just like up until 10 generations of the Pasuk. It's both males and for females, because it says Mamzer, which means Mumzar. Here also, Ad Oilam, that we're learning from the Gzeir Shavah. That's all we learn out from there. Now we're going to put it back to the context of Mamzer, which is Echet Zachar, Ech Nekevis. So therefore, the female Mamzerim will be forbidden forever. That's why our Tana of our Mishnah was going like. Now, Shalom is Rebbe Eliezer. They asked Rebbe Eliezer, Mamzeres la'ach asara dari mahu. What's the halacha about Mamzeres after 10 generations? Which Tosfos brings, they didn't really ask. It wasn't such a real question. It's just conceptually. So Amalam said to them, "Meetingly derech shlish v'aterena. Who's going to give me a third generation mamzeres, and I'm going to purify her?" Meaning to say that it's not something that's ever possible. You're not going to find ever a third generation mamzeres. Says Gemara, obviously because he has mamzer lechai. Then mamzerim they don't survive because Hashem doesn't want they should be intermarried into kosher people with their descendants, so they don't make it to even a third generation. Says Gemara, he says mamzer lechai. Mamzerim they don't survive. I says Gemara, mamzer forbidden forever. Obviously they could go on and on and on. So Amar Rabbi Zeh says not difficult. I'll explain to you. The Yevamos was explained from Rabbi Yehuda that there's different categories. We have 3 different categories of mamzer. If everyone knows clearly that this person is a mamzer, chai, him and his generations, they will survive because they're not going to get intermarried. Everyone knows that they're mamzer. If no one knows at all that this person is a mamzer, lo chai is not going to survive, even he himself, because we don't want him to even marry a kosher woman. If it's, let's say, known only to some people, then up until 3 generations, people will be careful, then chai they'll survive. More they won't survive, because since it's not so clear, it's going to be forgotten, so therefore only up until 3 generations they're going to survive. And actually, the Gemara brings an interesting story. There was a mamzer in the neighborhood of Rabami, and Achaz led mamzer. Rabami made an announcement, Yenim is a mamzer. He's crying. He says, he said, I gave you life. Because a mamzer doesn't survive. Now that everyone knows you're a mamzer, now you're going to live. He says, don't cry that I called you a mamzer. And don't try this at home. But, I called you a mamzer, I'm actually giving you life. Now, related to the halacha of the Mishnah, Amar Rav Chana bar Adam, we said in the Mishnah that mamzerim and the next category, Nesinim, they're forbidden to marry into the Kila and their prohibition is forever. So what's this halacha? So Nesinim, David Gazalim, David had made this Gezerah on the Nesinim. Hashem says the pasuk in Shmuel Beis. It says, Vayikra HaMelech L'Gevayim, the king called to the Gevayim, and he said to them, and Gevayim Lebnei Yisrael, it says the pasuk, the Gevayim, they were not from the Jewish people, etc. In other words, they're not really fit to come into the Kehillah to marry into the Jewish people. So it says the Gemara, the Gemara tells the story. Why did David Melch make a Gzeirah on the Nesinim / Gevayim that they were called Nesinim because it was given over to be used as Chayk ve'etzim shaymayim, as the Wasserträger and the Holzhacke. What was the reason that we made a Gzeirah that they should be forbidden? So says the Gemara, because it says a passage in Shmuel Beis. See, there was a hunger in the days of David Melch for 3 years. Shana, 1 year after the other. The first year, David Melch says to the Jewish people, maybe there's idol worshippers over here amongst you. Because if it says the pasuk in the bottom, it says, you're going to serve other gods. You're going to bow down to them. He's going to close the heavens. Well, it's not going to be rain. Maybe that's why there's a famine. But they checked, there was no egg there by the Zahar. Okay, so the second year he said to them, maybe there's some immoral people here that are sinning. There's something that says the pasuk in Yomei that the rains are held back. U'malkush lahaya, and there wasn't any late rains, because the forehead of a illicit woman you had to you, etc. In other words, it's referring to immorality, that's a reason that the rains don't come. But they checked, they didn't find anyone that was breached in the Indian of our eyes. Shlish Zalam, the third year, when there was a famine, he said to them, maybe there are people, they pledge huge amounts of money, and they don't give it. Why would that be a reason for the famine? That's like it's in Pasuk in Mishlei. It says, Nesiyim, Veruach, clouds and winds, and there's no rain. Ish Mishal, but means to check it, that's a man who prays himself with a false gift. In other words, he pledges, he doesn't give. That causes the rain to be held back, because it's actually the same idea. The clouds are there, the winds are there, you think it's going to pour? Nothing comes. This guy pledges $10 million to the shul, and it's the same idea. That like that, maybe that's why there's no rain. But they checked, they didn't find nothing like that. So Amai said the famous words, Eina davatali elabi. The president says, there's nothing more to do. I have to take the broom in my own hand. If that was a 19, says no one's doing it, it's not, no one to blame it on, but I'm going to have to do it all myself. It says there, David went to seek the face of Hashem. Mahi, what does that mean? Amar Shlakish, he says, he went to ask by the Umatum that the Kohen Gadol wears on the Chesed to find out what's going on. My mashma, what do you see that's what it means? Because Amar Bala says, Ashi Pnei Pnei, it's a Gzer Shabbat. Ksiv Achad says over here, David went to seek the face of Hashem. Ksiv Hasam says over there, that he asks in the judgment of the Urim in front of Hashem. Both say Pnei Hashem, just like over there, it means the Urim so to over here. Okay, so what did Hashem tell him? So it says over there in Shmuel Beis, V'yem Hashem. Hashem says, I'll tell you why this is happening. El Shol, because of Shol HaMelech. El Beis Adam, because of the house of blood. Al Hashahim HaGevanim, because they killed the Gevanim. So the Gemara says, what did that mean? El Shol means Shloi Nisbet Kalacha. They didn't eulogize Shol according to his great status. And the Beis Adam, what does it mean to the house of blood? Al Hashahim HaGevanim. Because Shol HaMelech killed out the Gevanim. So the Gemara says, where do we find in history that Shol HaMelech killed out the Gevanim? So you're right, he never killed the Gevanim. Because since he killed out Noiv, the city of Canaan, because they hid David HaMelech, so you must speak him Muslim that they actually provided, the Kahanim, provided food and water for the Gevanim, because the Gevanim, like we said, David HaMelech, they were chik ve'etz m'shay b'mayim from the Mizbeach, like it says in Sefer Yeshua, so they were the ones that served in the Beis HaMikdash, and the Kahanim were the ones who provided for them. And Shaul killed out the Kahanim of Noiv. So Ma'ala because of Kilargan, so the pasuk equated as if he killed the Gevanim. Now the Gemara says so interesting. Katava Kadosh Baruch Hu is petitioning El Shaul for the honor of Shaul. He's saying the famine's coming because they didn't properly eulogize him. And then in the same sentence, for Katava, then he's claiming the prosecuting for a punishment of Shaul, because he killed the Gevanim. Says the Gemara, yes, the Amar Shlakish in Ma'adas, it wasn't a pasuk in Tzefanya, Bakshas Hashem, Sikad Hashem, Kolam Ve'aretz, all the humble ones of the land, Hashem Mishpatei Pa'olu, that his judgment he activated. What does it mean, Mishpatei Pa'olu? Ba'asher Mishpatei, in the place where they judge a person, Sham Pa'aloi. That's where they mention his righteous actions. So yes, in the same breath that he's prosecuting Shaul, he's actually saying that they didn't properly eulogize Azagreis Tzaddik. So David said, okay, he found that the reason why this famine was happening. So he said, Nafkuluhu, as we continue to talk about Tesla Melch, it's already been 12 months after the death of Shaul HaMelech, and it's not appropriate to now eulogize him, which Rashi says not really 12 months. It's actually close to 30 years, because this was at the end of the years of David HaMelech. It's just not appropriate to eulogize someone after the year, after they already were consoled regarding the mess. As the Gemara says, so they picked 12 months, but it's already been 30 years. But after 12 months, you don't eulogize someone. That's already of his man the book of Kabbalah. But Nesinim, regarding this, that they were killed out, let's call their descendants, let's call the people and appease them. So immediately the pasuk says over there, so the king David HaMelech called the Gevanim, and he said to them, what can I do for you? That you'll bless the heritage of Hashem, because it was because of them that many of them were killed out, because they didn't have food, because the Noiv was killed out. which you see we're not even concerned for that. We're concerned about the goyim, that their tightness. So the Yevamos said to him, "Ein lanu. We don't have any claim against Shol HaMelech of Kesef Ezav Shol, gold and silver Shol. Then Beisai with his family. The only thing we want lives. Vein lanu ish v'goyim. Now we don't have any men that we want to kill from other Jews. Only the descendants of Shol HaMelech. We want to take revenge. Yuta lanu shiva anashim ibadav. Give us 7 men from his children. V'kan Hashem v'goyim, and we're going to hang them for the sake of Hashem, etc." So the Gemara tells us Matthias. David tried to appease them. But they weren't being appeased. They said, "No, the only way we're going to be Michael, we want to hang 7 of his sons." So Amar David Melech said like this: there's 3 signs that are in this nation of the Jewish people. Harachmanim, they're merciful. The Bashanim, they're ashamed-faced people. They get embarrassed when they do something wrong. Begam Chasadim, and they're people who do acts of kindness. Rachmanim d'chsev, merciful, like it says in the passage in the bottom. Manaslach Rachmanim is going to give you mercy, and he's going to make you merciful. Verbechen is going to increase you. You see that Hashem makes us Rachmanim. By Shem d'chsev, where people get embarrassed, like it says in Shemai's Babatir, that you should have your fear on your face, which that's really what busha is. You see in the person's face the awe of doing the right thing. And Gam Chasadim d'chsev in Bereshis, it says in the pasuk that Hashem was saying regarding Avram Avinu that Laman Ashiyitzav as Bonav as Beisa Begomis, so that he should command his sons and his family, etc., which it says over there after him, and they're going to safeguard the path of Hashem to do tzedakah umishpat. So you see that the children of Avram Avinu are good l'chasadim. So it said David HaMelech, Kol Sheish B'Shleish Tzman, whoever has these 3 signs, Roli Davi B'Umazu, is appropriate to cleave to this people. But the Gevoinim, since they're not merciful, they're not appropriate to connect themselves with the Jewish people. At that point, it's when David HaMelech made the Gzeira, and that's what it says in the Pasuk about Gevoinim Loibim Ne'yisol Hema, and that's where the source of the halacha of Amish is from, that in the Sinam Asuna, Asuna Isser Oilam, Echad Zecham Echnekedis, because they don't have the Rachmanis of the Jewish people, they're not appropriate to be part of the Yiddish people. Thank you.